In the middle of a sunny day at New York's Central Station, a legless beggar sees a strange man who appears as if from nowhere. The man, wearing dark glasses, stands calmly in the middle of the crowd, watching people rushing by. At that moment, a woman screams. Someone has pushed her and snatched her purse. The man in glasses helps the woman up just as the police arrive. They decide that he is the culprit, although the homeless beggar insists that the attackers were punks who have already run away. Nevertheless, the police question the man about his tickets and luggage. The man insists that he needs neither and refuses to take off his glasses, claiming that the light on this planet is too bright. This response immediately raises doubts about his sanity, and the police take the strange passenger away, although the beggar assures them one last time that the man did not come from the platform but appeared as if out of thin air. The strange man is sent to a psychiatric hospital in Manhattan. That day, Dr. Mark Powell, finishing work, steps into the corridor and inexplicably notices the newcomer being admitted to the clinic. The man turns around and also stares at the doctor for a long time. Intrigued, Mark asks to see the newcomer's file. His assistant, Dr. Chakraborty, points out that the man has no concussion, tumor, or epilepsy. However, his amnesia and delusions remain consistent. He does not consider himself human and claims to have come from another planet. It should be noted that a very strong drug was administered to him, yet he had no reaction at all, something considered impossible. Furthermore, there is no name in his file, nor any records of him being sought after, as if he truly did come from another planet. Mark invites the patient to his office. The man calls himself Prot and claims he is not sick, though he suffers from homesickness for his planet, Capax, located in the Lyra constellation. He says he traveled to Earth using light energy, which is inaccessible to Earthlings. When Mark mentions Einstein's research on this topic, Prot quotes the scientist's work, pointing out inaccuracies in some of his conclusions. Mark notes his excellent command of English, and Prot suddenly utters a strange tirade in a completely unintelligible language, resembling a bird's chatter. He explains that he only looks human here, but on his planet, he has a different form. This is not Prot's first time on Earth. He no longer remembers why he first visited, as Earth is an underdeveloped planet without active tourist routes. After their conversation, Prot goes to the common room, where other clinic patients spend their free time. At first, they regard him warily, but he calmly and kindly describes his planet, which is much larger than Earth and has 7 moons. Meanwhile, Dr. Mark Powell heads home, where his wife and children greet him. Yet even as he sits down to dinner, his mind remains occupied with work. The next day, Mark shows a recording of his conversation with Prot to his psychiatrist colleagues. However, the discussion yields no new insights. No one knows how to treat the man, nor even what to treat him for. The following day, Mark resumes his sessions with Prot, who unexpectedly eats a banana with the peel on, as if seeing it for the first time. At first, the doctor tries to help the patient, treating him condescendingly, since aliens are not uncommon among psychiatric patients. However, Prot describes Capax in such extraordinary detail that the doctor doesn't know what to think. According to Prot, the inhabitants of his planet reluctantly reproduce because it evokes unpleasant and even repulsive feelings. The process of procreation itself is very painful and nauseating. Speaking on this topic, Prot pulls out a notebook and a pencil stub, beginning to jot down notes. He explains that he must record interesting aspects of the planets he visits, and this particular facet of human relationships had previously escaped his notice. After their talk, Prot tries to approach one of the patients, Bess, but the others advise him against speaking to her. She has been in the clinic since childhood, after a fire in her home, and hasn't spoken to anyone since. Another patient, Doris, refuses to eat hospital food or leave her room. Prot asks for permission to enter, and upon receiving it, compliments the woman. She confesses that she is not insane, but rather romantic. Meanwhile, Dr. Chakraborty examines Prot's eyes, which are indeed highly sensitive to light. The man himself claims that he can even detect ultraviolet light, but Mark cannot believe this. Mark closes the windows and turns off the lights, and Prot finally removes his glasses. He continues talking about the inhabitants of Capax who do not form families, as children there are raised by the entire society. Therefore, no special feelings exist between parents and children. There are also no authorities or punitive organizations on the planet, as its inhabitants live by principles of goodness. He knows that humans live by the principle of an eye for an eye, a life for a life. But the universe has long realized the foolishness of such an approach. Even here on Earth, there were Buddha and Christ who taught people kindness, yet they went unheard. It is difficult for aliens to understand how Earthlings have not yet gone extinct. Later at home, Mark finds his brother-in-law Steve visiting. Steve works at an observatory, and Mark asks him to arrange a meeting between Prot and leading astronomers. He hopes to prove that such a planet does not exist and requests that Steve prepare a questionnaire on astronomy. The next day, upon arriving at the clinic, Mark notices a patient named Howie sitting by the window staring outside. When Mark asks him what he is doing, Howie replies that Prot told him to find the bluebird of happiness. If he completes 3 tasks given by Prot, he believes he will be cured. Mark goes looking for Prot and finds him speaking with another patient, Ernie, who is afraid to breathe the air. Prot calmly reassures him that it is not dangerous, and if he follows Prot's advice, he will become healthy. The doctor grows angry, pointing out that it is wrong to promise the patients that they can be cured. But Prout replies that every being can heal itself. On K-Pax, they have known this for thousands of years. He challenges Mark, asking why, if he is a real doctor, he has not cured all these people. Mark has no answer. Prout hands him a sheet of paper containing his answers to Steve's cosmic questions, hoping they will satisfy Mark. Later, Steve calls Mark, completely stunned. Prout has described the exact location of K-Pax, a planet recently discovered by Steve's boss. However, Steve is certain that no one could possibly know about it yet. Soon after, Mark takes Prout to meet with several renowned astronomers. Initially, they treat the man with great skepticism, especially when he refuses to explain the principle of interstellar travel. Prout believes humanity would misuse such knowledge and might blow up the planet. However, when they ask him to indicate the location of K-Pax, the scientists are astonished by the accuracy of his answers. They are particularly amazed by the precise calculation of K-Pax's trajectory in its native binary system in Lyra. The strangest part is that the very possibility of planets existing there had only recently been discovered by one of the astronomers, and this information has not yet been published, known only to a handful of scientists worldwide. The astronomers are dumbfounded, unable to explain what is happening. Mark suggests that the man might be a genius. Meanwhile, at the clinic, Howie approaches the window and suddenly spots a bluebird. His cries attract both patients and staff, and soon the entire hospital gathers by the windows. People cheer like children, waving their hands, laughing, and embracing one another. Mark, hearing the commotion, rushes to the scene and is surprised to see a bright blue bird outside the window. He realizes it is just an ordinary blue jay, but the changes it has brought to the patients are extraordinary. Doris, who had never left her room, stepped outside and walked up to the window, while Bess, who had not spoken a word to anyone for years, turned to Prout and called him the bluebird of happiness himself. The next morning, a patient named Sal, who constantly imagines strange smells, asked Prout to take him to K-Pax. Prout expresses regret that Sal cannot experience the scent of flowers on his planet, but explains that he can only take one person with him. Later, Mark calls Prout in to express his dissatisfaction, as many patients have been agitated by his promise to take someone to K-Pax, leading to arguments among them. Prout defends himself, saying he explained that he can only take one person and will choose the most deserving when the time comes for him to leave. The doctor is puzzled. When and how does the man intend to return to his planet? Prout informs him that he will leave on July 27th at exactly 5:51. Mark is baffled by such precision, and even in his sleep, he keeps wondering what this date could mean. Awakening in the middle of the night, he listens to recordings of their conversations multiple times, and finally realizes that something terrible must have happened to Prout exactly 5 years ago, on July 27th. A trauma of this magnitude could have broken his psyche, and Mark knows he must reach the man's consciousness before this deadline. The next day, Mark and his family invite Prout into their home, hoping that a normal family environment might cause him to reveal something about himself. At first, Prout behaves calmly, but suddenly, upon seeing the family dog, he runs toward it. Despite the family's attempts to restrain him, the dog, who normally dislikes everyone, literally leaps into Prout's arms. To everyone's shock, Prout starts barking as if conversing with the dog, then translates. The dog requests that the children stop hiding her favorite sneaker. He also adds that the dog has trouble hearing in her left ear, so they shouldn't sneak up on her. Later, Mark's wife serves Prout a fruit salad. As it turns out, he does not eat meat. Prout then strolls around the yard, plays with the children, and admires the flowers. When he goes back inside, Prout looks at the photographs and asks about a young man in one of the pictures. Learning that it is Mark's son from his first marriage, Prout speaks with Mark's wife about the value of family. She explains that family involves deep concern for loved ones. Prout responds that on K-Pax, families do not exist, so he cannot fully understand her feelings. Outside again, Prout begins pushing Mark's daughter on the swing, and Mark notices that he does so as if it was once a familiar routine. Prout continues to play with the children and behaves like a completely normal person until the lawn's sprinkler system suddenly turns on. Something changes in Prout. He seems transformed. He grabs Mark's daughter and tries to pull her away from the water jets, screaming about the dangers of the water and frightening the girl. Mark and the others are forced to restrain him, and only when the water stops does Prout instantly calm down. Mark realizes that something deep within Prout's psyche remains buried. He describes the incident to his supervisor, Claudia Villars. When Claudia suggests that Prout might have violent tendencies, Mark denies this, explaining that Prout was sincerely trying to save his daughter from something terrible. Mark deduces that the event that broke Prout's mind must have involved water. He proposes using regression hypnosis on Prout. Villars objects, warning that the method is very dangerous, but Mark convinces her, arguing that time is running out before Prout's self-appointed date. Who knows how he will behave on that day? However, while Mark and Villars are debating, Prout disappears. Other patients calmly report that Prout has gone to Greenland to finish his report. They assure Mark that he will return soon, so there's nothing to worry about. Prout is searched for throughout the clinic, but cannot be found. Only 3 days later does he suddenly reappear in the garden, telling Mark that he has been to various places, mostly in the north. An angry Mark insists that Pratt undergo deep hypnosis. During the session, Mark uncovers murky memories from Pratt's past. Pratt recalls a silver coffin belonging to his friend's father who died in a workplace accident, the place where cows are killed. Pratt's pulse spikes by 10 beats, clearly showing his discomfort. Mark urges him to move forward slightly in his memories. Pratt calms down and begins talking about K-Pax again. He reveals that he frequently visited his friend. When his friend fell ill, his father bought a telescope and every evening would tell them about the stars. But now Pratt says his friend has lost interest in the stars and calls for him only when something bad happens. Pratt begins to grow agitated again, and Mark is warned that continuing the hypnosis could be dangerous. The doctor wakes him from the trance. Later, Mark instructs his secretary to find the addresses of all slaughterhouses in the United States, excluding major cities where the stars are not visible. Meanwhile, the patients in the clinic argue about who Pratt will take with him to K-Pax. Howie suggests a writing contest so that Pratt can learn more about each of them and decide who is most deserving. The patients eagerly begin working on their entries. Pratt undergoes another hypnosis session. This time he does not go as far and sees his friend. However, he flatly refuses to name him, though he does mention the year 1985. When asked his age, he again gives an imaginary number. Pratt explains that his friend is 17, but his girlfriend is expecting a child. His friend will marry, have children, and repeat the same mistakes that destroyed his father. Mark asks Pratt to move forward 2 weeks and allows him to walk around in his memories. Pratt describes it as now being 1991. This time, his friend called him for no particular reason. His friend is a knocker, one who strikes cows on the head to keep them from resisting. He lives in a small house surrounded by trees and a river. He is married to Sarah and they have a daughter, Rebecca, whose birthday is coming up. After the session, Mark is reviewing his findings when he is told that Howie almost strangled Ernie. Mark rushes to see the patient and is met by a calm, enlightened man who explains that he was choking Ernie on Pratt's instructions. Having returned from the brink of death, Ernie now understands that there is no reason to fear everything and everyone, as death is always near, and humans cannot change that. Ernie can now sleep on his stomach, eat fish with bones, and swallow the largest pills. He says he feels wonderful. Howie is also pleased that he has healed a friend. Another of Pratt's assignments has been completed, and Howie is confident that he will be cured too. Mark constantly thinks about Pratt's case and continues the hypnosis sessions. One day, he dares to name the date, July 27, but Pratt assures him that he is on K-Pax, gathering mushrooms. Suddenly, he hears his friend calling for him and rushes to Earth. Pratt sees his friend by the river behind his house. He takes off his clothes because he wants to leave, having done something terrible. Pratt refuses to tell Mark what happened, saying even his friend did not want to know. At the mention of Sarah and Rebecca, Pratt has a fit of rage. He screams and cries, and Mark is forced to wake him from hypnosis. Later, Mark heads home, and as he does, a stub of a pencil he had taken from Pratt falls out of his pocket. Mark examines the remaining numbers written on it and traces them to the store where the pencil was purchased. This leads him to a small town where he finds an article dated July 28, 5 years earlier, describing a tragedy in the family of Robert Porter. Mark flies to the town, the sheriff takes him to the former Porter home and recounts the horrific events that occurred there 5 years ago. The house has remained abandoned since then. No one wants to live there. At the time, the family consisted of Robert, a slaughterhouse worker, his wife Sarah, and their daughter Rebecca. As the sheriff speaks, Mark feels as though he is witnessing the events firsthand. While Robert was at work, an ex-convict broke into the house. What started as a robbery turned into something far worse. The intruder assaulted Sarah and then killed both her and Rebecca. When Robert returned home and found the criminal at the scene, the strong man snapped the intruder's neck as though it were a twig. Then he went to the river and threw himself into the water. The body was never recovered, but Robert was declared dead. Mark is so deeply moved by the story that he cannot hold back his tears. The sheriff shows him the river and asks him to keep the identity of the person found a secret, saying he has suffered enough already. Mark returns home where, looking at his family, he is struck by the realization that this family is what makes life worth living. Meanwhile, the clinic patients throw a party to celebrate Pratt's departure and demand that he announce who will go with him to K-Pax. Howie collects the written essays while Mark shares a drink with Pratt. Pratt advises Mark to spend more time with his family and invite his son to the celebration. He tells Mark that beings from Earth could populate 50 planets, and all of them are connected to one another. But on K-Pax, this is not the case. If Pratt does not return, no one there will miss him. Mark pleads with Pratt to stay with them, but Pratt cannot. He must finish his report, though he laments losing his pencil. Mark hands him his pen and shows him a photo, trying to prove that Pratt is Robert Porter, but Pratt refuses to acknowledge this. Meanwhile, Sal asks a direct question, wanting to know whom Pratt will take with him. Pratt announces that whoever falls asleep first will receive an extra point. The patients scatter to their rooms. Pratt gives Howie his final assignment, to stay here and be ready for anything. An exhausted Mark returns home and falls asleep on the couch, not wanting to miss Pratt's scheduled departure. The hospital goes quiet, and only Pratt sits on his bed. The security guards nervously watch the monitors, debating whether he will leave or not. The appointed hour arrives, but the doctor's late. The sun rises as Mark rushes up the stairs, while Pratt removes his glasses and places them on the table. At that moment, the security cameras stop working. The sunlight floods Pratt's room, and just then, Doris steps out of the room, delaying Mark from getting there in time. When he finally bursts into the room, he finds it empty. He then discovers Pratt unconscious under the bed. Pratt is wheeled through the hospital corridors on a stretcher, but those around him seem not to recognize him anymore. Soon after, news comes that Bess has disappeared from her room. This means Pratt chose her because, in her essay, she wrote that she had no home. Sometime later, Mark pushes Pratt in a wheelchair. The man cannot speak or move, but Mark feels that he can hear and understand everything. So Mark tells him that Howie now works in a library, and Ernie has become a crisis counselor. Only Bess remains missing. When Mark asks Robert if he knows what truly happened on July 27th, Robert only smiles enigmatically. Mark promises to wait as long as it takes for him to be ready to share his secret. Later at the airport, Mark and his eldest son meet, reconnecting and remembering that they are the closest people to each other. Over the final scenes, Pratt's voice speaks. On K-Pax, they have long understood that the universe expands, contracts, and then expands again. It will continue this way forever. Everything will always repeat itself. Therefore, it is crucial to correct mistakes because there will be no other chance. How to interpret the film's ending? The fantastical interpretation suggests that the alien left Earth, abandoning Porter's body and transferring into Bess's body, thus helping her find her home and purpose. The realistic interpretation proposes that the brain of the mentally ill man shut down completely and Bess simply ran away, chasing a mythical happiness. In either case, the ending remains open to the viewer's interpretation. This is beautiful, as everyone judges life based on their own beliefs and understanding.